Elif had rented a house by the lake in a small town, seeking refuge from the chaos of city life. The wooden house overlooked the lake, promising the peace she desperately needed. When she arrived, the elderly owner gave her a tour. The house was filled with old furniture, and the windows offered a view of the still, dark waters of the lake. "You'll find it very quiet here," the old man said, his voice carrying a strange tone, as if there was more he wanted to say, but chose not to. Elif didn't pay much attention. She was too eager to start her retreat. The first night was uneventful. She fell asleep quickly, the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore soothing her. But the next night, she woke up in the middle of the night to a soft, eerie sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. Elif sat up in bed, straining her ears. The sound seemed to come from the lake, a haunting melody that chilled her to the bone. It was as if someone, or something, was calling out from the depths. Curiosity getting the better of her, she wrapped a shawl around herself and ventured outside. The night was cold, and a thick mist had settled over the lake. The whispering grew louder as she approached the shore, forming incomprehensible words, yet pulling her closer. Then she saw it, a faint figure standing on the water, its form shimmering in the moonlight. It was a woman, her long hair flowing like black silk, her eyes two dark voids that seemed to swallow all light. Elif froze in fear, unable to move as the figure slowly began to glide towards her, its voice now a wail filled with sorrow and anger. The stories the old man had told her briefly came to mind. Tales of a woman who had drowned in the lake years ago, her body never found, her spirit cursed to roam the waters forever. Elif realized with horror that the ghost had found her next victim. Suddenly, the figure surged towards her, and Elif turned to run, her heart pounding in her chest. She sprinted back to the house, slamming the door behind her, but the wailing continued, echoing through the walls. That night, Elif didn't sleep. At dawn, she packed her belongings and fled the house, never to return. Weeks later, the old man received a letter from her, saying she would never forget the terrible presence that haunted the silent lake. He sighed as he read it, knowing that no matter how many people left, the ghost of the lake would always be there, waiting for someone to listen to her mournful song. The house by the lake remained vacant after that, with only the sound of the wind and water breaking the silence, and a ghostly figure standing in the mist, endlessly waiting. Lena had just moved into her new home, an old Victorian house that had stood empty for years. It was the kind of house that people avoided, the locals whispering about its history, but Lena wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. She was excited to start fresh, to restore the house to its former glory. As she unpacked, she discovered a small door leading to the attic. Curious, she climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the door. The attic was dimly lit by a small, dirty window and covered in dust. Most of the space was empty, except for a large, ornate mirror leaning against one wall. The mirror was old, its frame carved with intricate patterns of vines and flowers. The glass was slightly tarnished, giving it a faint, ghostly reflection. Despite its age, there was something captivating about it. Lena decided to keep the mirror, thinking it would make a beautiful addition to her living room once she cleaned it up. She carried it downstairs and set it against the wall, planning to hang it later. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought she heard a faint sound, like someone whispering her name. She sat up, listening, but the house was silent. Shaking off the feeling, she went back to sleep. The next day, strange things began to happen. Lena would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror out of the corner of her eye, but when she turned to look, nothing was there. Objects in the house would move on their own, a chair slightly out of place, a book she had left on the table now on the floor. As the days passed, the occurrences grew more unsettling. Lena started to see a shadowy figure in the mirror, standing just behind her. It was always there, just out of reach, and yet she felt its presence intensely. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just her imagination, but the fear gnawed at her. One evening, while reading in her living room, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. Startled, she looked around, but she was alone, except for the mirror. The shadow in the reflection was now clearer, taking on the shape of a woman, her face hidden in darkness. Lena's heart pounded as she realized the figure wasn't just a reflection. It was real. Panicking, she tried to cover the mirror with a blanket, but the shadowy woman reached out, her hand pressing against the glass from the inside. The mirror suddenly cracked, a web of fractures spreading across its surface, but the figure remained. Lena screamed and ran from the house, not daring to return until she could find someone to take the cursed mirror away. The next morning, she called a local antiques dealer, explaining that she wanted to get rid of the mirror. The dealer, an old man with a grave expression, listened carefully. When he arrived at the house, he took one look at the mirror and paled. "This mirror," he said slowly, "is not just an antique. It belonged to a woman who died tragically in this house. Her spirit is trapped in it, and she will not rest until she finds someone to take her place." Lena shivered, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Without hesitation, she agreed to have the mirror removed, and the old man promised to take it far away, where it could do no more harm. After the mirror was gone, the house returned to its peaceful state, but Lena could never forget the face she had seen in the cracked glass, or the cold touch of a ghost desperate to escape her prison. She knew she had come dangerously close to being pulled into a world from which there was no return. In a small village nestled deep in the countryside, there was a forest that everyone knew to avoid after dark. The locals called it the Whispering Woods because, at night, eerie voices could be heard among the trees, calling out to anyone foolish enough to listen. Eva, a young woman new to the village, had heard the stories but didn't believe them. She was a skeptic, dismissing the tales as nothing more than superstitions meant to scare children. One evening, as she walked home from the market, she decided to take a shortcut through the forest, determined to prove to herself that there was nothing to fear. As she entered the woods, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the path. The trees loomed tall, their branches intertwining like twisted fingers. The air grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled over the forest, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Eva walked on, her footsteps crunching on the leaves underfoot. After a few minutes, she began to hear it, the faintest of whispers, just on the edge of hearing. It was soft at first, barely audible, but as she moved deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Turn back," the voices seemed to say, though she couldn't be sure. The words were muddled, as if spoken from a great distance. Eva's heart started to race, but she told herself it was just the wind, the product of an overactive imagination. But the further she walked, the more distinct the voices became. They were not just whispers anymore. They were calling her name. "Eva, Eva." The voices echoed through the trees, surrounding her, coming from all directions. A chill ran down her spine, and she quickened her pace, trying to find her way out of the woods. But the path seemed to twist and turn in ways she didn't recognize, leading her deeper into the darkness. Panic set in as the voices grew louder, almost angry now. "Leave this place," they hissed. "You do not belong here." Eva broke into a run, but the whispers followed her, the voices blending into one terrible cacophony. She could feel something behind her, a presence, unseen but unmistakable, closing in. She dared not look back, fear gripping her heart like a vice. Suddenly, she stumbled and fell, scraping her hands on the rough ground. As she struggled to get up, she saw it, a figure standing in the shadows ahead. It was a woman, her face pale and ghostly, eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her hair disheveled and hanging around her face like a curtain. "Why did you come here?" the woman whispered, her voice carrying a haunting echo. "This is our home, and we protect it from those who do not belong." Eva's breath caught in her throat as she scrambled to her feet. The woman's eyes locked onto hers, filled with a sadness that was almost tangible. "Go," she said softly, "before it's too late." Without a second thought, Eva turned and ran, the whispers now a deafening roar in her ears. She ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at her skin, the path seeming to stretch endlessly before her. Just when she thought she would never escape, the trees suddenly thinned, and she burst out of the woods and onto the village road. Gasping for breath, she looked back at the forest. The whispers had stopped, the woods now silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But Eva knew she had been warned. The Whispering Woods were not just a place of superstition. They were alive, inhabited by spirits who fiercely guarded their territory. From that night on, Eva never ventured near the forest again. She had learned the hard way that some places were best left undisturbed, where the past lingered on and the dead refused to rest. Ashcroft Manor had stood for over a century, a grand estate surrounded by dense woods. It was once the pride of the town, but now it was a place of whispers and rumors. The last owners, the Ashcroft family, had disappeared without a trace years ago, leaving the mansion abandoned. Locals claimed the house was cursed, that the spirits of the Ashcrofts still wandered the halls, waiting for someone to join them. One cold autumn day, Thomas, a historian with a passion for uncovering the truth behind local legends, decided to spend a night at Ashcroft Manor. He was determined to debunk the tales of hauntings and uncover the true story of the Ashcroft family. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and his notebook, he made his way to the manor as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was as imposing as he'd imagined, its once elegant facade now weathered and covered in ivy. The windows were dark, like empty eyes watching his every move. The front door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, revealing a grand but decaying interior. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood and neglect. Thomas set up his equipment in the large foyer and began his investigation. As he explored the manor, he took notes on the architecture and snapped photos of the rooms, all while narrating his thoughts into a voice recorder. Hours passed, and the house remained silent, offering no signs of the supernatural. Feeling confident that the stories were just that, stories, Thomas decided to explore the upper floors. As he climbed the grand staircase, he felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped significantly. Ignoring it, he continued up, reaching the long, dimly lit hallway that stretched before him. The hallway was lined with portraits of the Ashcroft family, their faces frozen in time. Thomas examined them one by one, noting the fine details of the paintings. But as he moved to the last portrait, he felt an eerie sensation, as though the eyes of the family members were following him. Brushing off the feeling, he moved to the master bedroom, the room where the family had supposedly spent their final night. The bed was still made, covered in a thick layer of dust, and the furniture was undisturbed. He took a deep breath and sat down, preparing to take notes, when suddenly, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Thomas jumped up, his heart racing. He rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as he pulled at the handle, but it was as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Then, the temperature in the room plummeted, and his breath came out in visible puffs of air. The room grew darker, the shadows in the corners seeming to stretch and twist toward him. Thomas fumbled for his flashlight, but it flickered and died, leaving him in near darkness. And then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. Turning around slowly, he saw the source of the sound. The closet door on the far side of the room was slightly ajar, and the tapping was coming from within. His mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening, but deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it became a frantic pounding. The closet door burst open, and out stepped a figure, a tall, shadowy silhouette of a man. His eyes were hollow, his face twisted in a silent scream of agony. Thomas backed away, terror seizing him as the figure advanced slowly, its ghostly form gliding across the floor. The room filled with whispers, the same phrase repeated over and over. "Join us. Join us." The voices grew louder, echoing through the room as the figure reached out a hand toward Thomas. He could feel a coldness creeping over him, draining the warmth from his body as the figure's hand drew closer. Just as he thought he would be consumed by the darkness, the door to the room suddenly flew open and the figure vanished, leaving only the echo of the whispers behind. Thomas bolted out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the manor, not stopping until he reached his car. He never returned to Ashcroft Manor, and he never spoke of what happened that night. The house remained as it was, untouched and abandoned, with the spirits of the Ashcroft family still waiting in the shadows, longing for someone to join them in their eternal torment.